Okay, let's continue with our lecture on mathematical methods. Today we are going to cover an interesting topic on Dirac delta function L2 space, or popularly known as a Hilbert space. Now Dirac delta function, we have often call it, is a pride of mathematical physicists, is the improper function first proposed by Dirac, known for its integral properties, and based on the integral properties, the rest of the properties can be easily derived. Many things were mathematically not very rigorous. So in this lecture also, when we cover Dirac delta function, there are few loose strings. Now some of the gaps or proofs we will fill in as we go along, because there are easier way to show them based on the differential equation rather than starting from simple principle. In this lecture, the properties of Dirac delta functions are simply listed and given a brief understanding about what is going on. And based on the integral properties, one need to either prove the rest of the properties or use them in solving the problem. So let's continue with the lecture. This is a part of course PH 3103 at IISER Calcutta. Okay, let's start with the definition of delta function. Dirac delta function is a mathematically an improper function with the following properties. It is mainly identified by its property. Two of these important properties are given as follows. First one, delta of x minus a is equal to 0 for x not equal to a. Here we first consider delta function in one dimension, that is in the real line. It can be easily generalized to higher dimension, so but we will focus mainly on one dimension for the simplicity of it, and to prove if necessary the certain properties which are important in the mathematical methods. So the first of this property is the delta function is essentially 0 everywhere except at a single point. A be that point where it is not equal to 0. The value of function at that point is not really defined. The second important property of delta function is the integral in the interval from t to q. Delta of x minus a dx is equal to 1 if a is in the interval p and q, and it is equal to 0 if a is not in the interval. That means you have a integration of delta function is 0 if your point at which it is not finite, not inside your interval, and if it is inside your interval, then you would get to 0. Let us look at it pictorially. You have interval p and q over which your delta function is defined, and your delta function is essentially 0 everywhere except the point x is equal to a. Otherwise it is essentially 0, and it is non-zero and its value is not given, so at x is equal to a. That is what do we have as a properties of delta function. Some important thing is that using these two properties we can also deduce several more properties, and that is what we will be looking at. The first one is for a smooth function. A smooth function means that it's differentiable n times in the given interval. So if you take the integral from p to q, f of x into delta x minus a into dx is equal to f of a if a belongs to the interval pq, or it is inside this integral, and if it is 0 if a is not inside this integral where you are doing the integration. Now let us see how to show this in a simplified manner. Let's take a small interval around very small, we call it an epsilon on either side, and then we can write our integral p to q in several parts. That is, first we take integral from p to a minus epsilon f of x delta x minus a dx, plus we make another integral from a minus epsilon to a plus epsilon, inside which we have a point x is equal to a, then f of x into delta x minus a dx, and then the last part is from a plus epsilon to q is the same integral. By the virtue of delta function being 0 in the interval p to a minus epsilon, the first integral goes to 0, and then the same way in the last interval, that is a plus epsilon to q, again delta function is 0, and that is again the last term of the integral going to 0. Now we have to evaluate this integral and show that it is equal to f of a. Now we are assuming the parameter epsilon is very small, that the interval is very close around x is equal to a. In such a small interval, we can assume f of x to be nearly constant, which is given by f of a, and then what we can pull it out from the integral, and the integral become f of a into integral a minus epsilon to a plus epsilon delta x minus a dx, and by the properties of delta function, that interval is going to be 1, and that shows that integral is equal to f of a. So this is somewhat what we do to show this property, and this is basically something which is very important for the Dirac delta function, though it looks somewhat a crooked way of proving, but essentially this is what is done in the most of the cases in the Dirac delta function. Okay, let's look at an example. The first thing to keep in mind that the delta function is an improper function and hence cannot be represented in the closed form. It is usually represented in terms of a series or some limit n going to infinity. Let's look at our example, which is fairly simple. Function f of x is equal to limit n going to infinity, small n going from 1 to capital N cos nx is equal to delta x. Our claim is that this summation with the limit n going to infinity represent a delta function. So let us take a different approach. The first approach is to plot this for taking n from 1 to a large number, or which is sufficient to show the behavior of this function. So we could take n is equal to 0 also. It is essentially a constant. Cos 0 is 1, and it basically shifts everything up 1, adds a constant, otherwise it does not change anything. So I removed n is equal to 0 from this summation, and we start from n is equal to 1. So as we see that cos x, when you add more frequencies and add them together, eventually a function at 0 seems to keep on growing up, adds up, and goes all the way till maybe infinity, while the away from 0, in most of the cases, the amplitude falls off, and eventually when large number of terms are taken, this goes to 0. Same we see that the oscillation seems to be increasing somewhat very close to 0, but as number of terms increases, that interval comes closer and closer and closer to 0. When very large number of terms are taken, those oscillations were all shrink, and this is exactly represents the behavior of delta function, where function is 0 everywhere except x is equal to 0, and this is a delta function at x is equal to 0. So how do we mathematically show that this is in fact a delta function? There is a somewhat self-contradiction here. What I mean to say is that the Dirac delta function is a mathematically an improper function. How do you mathematically show that it is a delta function? So it is somewhat a contradiction. So I hope you understand what do you mean by showing mathematically it is in fact a delta function. So what do you mean by that? We need to show that this summation, here limit I have removed, simply taking the summation from n going from 1 to infinity, in fact shows a delta function. That means this function should have a value 0 when x is not equal to 0, and it is not equal to 0 when x is equal to 0. The another important property which we need to show that either integral of this function around 0 is 1, or we can also show that we take a smooth function g of x and evaluate integral g of x, limit n going to infinity, sum n from 1 to capital N cos nx dx is g of 0. So both of these need to be shown somehow within the background, and there might be somewhat difficult to show this because it requires some of the knowledge of the how you show. You can actually take an epsilon delta definition of limits and then show that it is equal to 0. But however, there are a much easier method using properties of a differential equation. In other way, the series which we have here is actually a cosine series, or it is a part of a Fourier series. You have any function can be represented in terms of a sine and cos, so you have half of the Fourier series here. In such case, what we are showing is that sum of cos nx becomes the delta function. Similarly, we can also show that the sine nx also represent a delta function. This is in fact is a very general properties of all orthonormal functions that we can easily show using the properties of a differential equation, and that we will do it sometime later. So in order to prove this exactly is delta function, we need to wait some time. Or if you think that you are impatient and you are able to show it, please write it down neatly and scan it and send it to me by email. Might have a more than one way to show this depending on your mathematical temperament. Now, idea is to go with the spirit of Dirac delta function, take them only with their properties and use them further to either deduce more property or to solve certain important problem, and that problem we will come very soon. But first, let's go over some more properties of delta function. One of the important properties of delta function is that integral from minus infinity to plus infinity f of x delta prime x minus xa dx is equal to minus f prime a. Now you might be thinking, what is going on here? You are talking of a mathematically improper function. Now you are going to differentiate it. That's interesting, but how do we understand this? The point is that it is always within the integral, and we can play around with the properties of Dirac delta function, which essentially we know two of these properties and use them to show the integral. In a way, this x prime here is basically differentiation, that is dx by ax. It symbolically stands for that. And what is a differentiation of improper function? We will not be going into details of that. Now, since we are talking about differentiation, let's blindly use our chain rule, or in terms of integration, it is called integration by parts. And this integral can be simply written as this. It is a straightforward, and that is coming from the integration by parts. Once we do that, rest is fairly simple. We just use the property of delta function, and that is equal to f prime a. So this is how we are able to even talk about the differentiation of the Dirac delta function. In principle, we don't really have to do anything. We just play around with the mathematical symbol and use the property of delta function. It's rather amusing, but maybe not for mathematicians. Now there comes another interesting property, that is a delta of x into a. You simply scale the variable, and then you would get is a 1 by a into delta of x. This might look somewhat strange why it should be multiplied by 1 by a. So the reason is fairly straightforward. Let's start with this integral from minus infinity to plus infinity f of x delta a x into dx. What we can do here is that simply change the variable y is equal to a into x. Then we have dx is equal to 1 by a into dy. So this is where that 1 by a is coming. Let's substitute back. You have a 1 by a integral minus infinity to plus infinity f of y by a into delta of y dy. Now we have a simple delta function here, which we know all about its integral, and then that is around 0, and then it doesn't matter, you multiply or divide by 0, and then you have this result showed that this must be equal to true. So here again you see the gap, how we are coming to a conclusion. You might simply ask me that why, if this property is true, why that should be delta function of a certain parameter. So of course this is all we follow. We have only two rules to play around with that, and we make a deduction only based on that, and that is how the properties of delta function being proved. So from this we conclude that delta of a into x is equal to 1 by a into delta x. So you might have your own doubt regarding the procedure which we followed, but Dirac didn't have any problem using this property. Above has a little more general property, so that is given by here. Here what we have is a delta of a function f of x that can be written as sum I going from some finite number, sum over I, df prime by dx evaluated xi. These are the roots of the function. We know that the delta function is important only when the argument goes to 0. That is why it should be the root of this function f of x. We believe that the f of x has a certain finite roots, and which are used here compute this value. So what you have is this differential d prime of f of x is evaluated at each of these roots into delta of x minus xi. So if you look at that, this is like a function a into x. That is what we are looking at, and the root is at x is equal to 0. So that is where we have differentiation a of x is equal to, that simply comes out to be 1 by a into delta x is the delta function, is exactly what we are looking at. So this way this turns out to be a more general case. There are also several properties, and including the generalization to higher dimension and so on. However, currently it is sufficient to have these properties of a delta function. So for our next few lectures we might need some of these properties, and that is why I am quickly going over them. So our next goal is to move on from complex number in a little more interesting subject called square integrable function, or we are essentially now coming back to vector space or Hilbert space. Let f of x be a real function in a closed interval a b, then it is called square integrable integral going from a to b mod f of x square dx should be finite. In simple word, the square integrable function is whose mod square is integrated within a closed interval takes the finite value. But there are many interesting things you can do with that. We have said that the function is real. Then we see that the mod square is essentially f of x into f of x. That is a positive definite. Of course, we can easily define this for the complex numbers. There is no real reason to stick the function of real variable, since you are already experts in the complex function. We can also do it for the complex function. In such case, what we have is a mod square is written as f of z into f of z star. So this should be not x, it should be z is a complex variable, and then that can be easily integrated from a to b, and that should be finite. So that is what we call is a complex L2 function. There is no reason to restrict ourselves to real function at all. Is in addition to simply defining it that way, we can add a weight function. We include a weight function f of x, which is a finite positive definite function, and that integral multiplied with the mod f square should be finite interval a to b. Now it is important that the function f of x should be positive definite, otherwise if it is a wiggly function or if it has a negative terms which cancels out and so on, there is a possibility of this integral going 0 and all that. Such things are not allowed. So w of x should be positive definite. So weight function should be positive definite. Because it is a common thing to have an interval stretched from a to b to from minus infinity to plus infinity. In such case, we simply replace these limits from minus infinity to plus infinity, and integral should be finite, and then that is what we call is a L2 function. So this is a more general definition of a L2 function, where you are considering all possible interval. Let's look at some of the example. That's a quick way of giving an assignments too. Now let us look at the function f of x is equal to 1 by x in the interval 0 to 1. This function is not L2 function. If we integrate this from 0 to 1 at x is equal to 0, it is going to blow up, and that is reflected in the integral also, and this integral is not going to be finite. So you will have 1 by x square, which is integrated, which will blow up at x is equal to 0. Now there is a simple trick can be played to make a function integrable when you add a weight function. Weight function is basically a freedom you have. You have to have a positive definite function. You have x square. If you use x square as your weight function, then this function 1 by x becomes a square integrable. This is fairly interesting and rather intriguing effect, including the weight function. What does exactly weight function do? How does it really change a function from not being L2 to being L2? So we have added an x square into whole geometry, and that one need to look at the vector space itself, which we will soon do, and how does it change the dot product by adding the weight function. So you see that in the general sense that it is a dot product between the two functions, and that dot product is defined in various ways. There is a non-unique way of defining the dot product, and that is reflected here, and weight function can be suitably chosen to define your dot product properly between the vectors. So next is f of x is equal to sine x, which is an L2 function, which is a very trivial one. So we have another interesting function, f of x is equal to tan x in the interval from minus pi to plus pi. Is L2 or not? That is for you to decide. Let me go ahead. Idea here is to go into Hilbert space, where functions are forming a vector space. Let's have a quick look at the idea of vector space. It is actually a fairly quick or remind what is a vector space. I am sure you are all very familiar with the idea of vector space, and indulging in a lot of time is a really waste. In such case, I thought quickly emphasize what is the idea of vector space, or how an abstract vector space is important for us. We are interested vector spaces in an abstract manner because we are going to apply it for the set of all functions. So first is to call what is a vectors. Our way of looking at the vector is unlike scalar. Vectors have both magnitude and direction. Of course, what is scalar? So I assume that you are already familiar with what is scalars. I also believe what you know by magnitude and direction. It entirely way of skipping up whole lot of things. Let's look at the pictorially how to look at a vectors in a two dimension. A vector in this is given by a magnitude that represents its length, and a direction, that is a arrow which you are pointing it. So that is what you call is a direction or the unit vector in along the vector, and you also have the magnitude of a vector represent how long that arrow is. Now how do we add these two arrows? It's not shooting arrow at each other. If you have two vectors at one place and another place, what we are told in our lower classes is that we simply bring them together and then simply keep close to each other, do a parallelogram law, you build it and then simply shift it along other, and that gives you sum of the vector. So this is what we call is a parallelogram. Now I am not really going into how to add two vectors in a conventional sense. It is sufficient to have a rule given to you. The rule as simple as parallelogram law or any other rule. We do not really care. All it says is that you should be able to add them. So that is all we need from the mathematical perspective. It doesn't matter whether it is a parallelogram law or some other law. You just need to tell me how to add two vector. In the same way, you should be able to scale a vector. That means you multiply a vector by a scalar. So that simply means that you increase the length of the vector or scale it along with the size of the scaling factor given to you. You have been given a vector v with particular magnitude and direction, and you simply scale it by increase its size, and direction remains the same. It doesn't change unless you change with the minus sign. Then you have to incorporate the sign. You may be able to flip the direction by using the opposite sign. So this is how you give the two important properties of vector. That is, you should be able to add the vector, and you should be able to multiply a vector by a real number. So now we come back to our L2 space. That is, we have set of all function which are L2, that is a square integrable in a given interval. That means that integral from a to b mod f of x square dx should be finite. That is a definition of L2 function, and the claim is that the L2 function forms the vector space. Now we can redefine the inner product between the two elements of a L2 space, that let phi and psi be the two vectors in a L2 space. We can call the dot product in a conventional mathematical sense, or you could simply use the Dirac's way of using bracket. It is very popular in the quantum mechanics. Otherwise, explicitly write down the dot product as an integral a to b phi of x into psi of x dx. Now this space, L2 space, is also called the Hilbert space. Hilbert space is essentially continuous vector space. Now we got to check if this in fact is a vector space or not. How do we check? We have two rules. We should be able to multiply a given element of vector space with the number, and that should also belongs to your vector space. So let's take an element or vector phi in this L2 space, and then we multiply it by a number alpha, and then you would end up another element xi, which should be a part of the vector space. That we have to show this. Phi is an element of L2 space. That means this condition is satisfied. Now we have to show that this also satisfies the same condition. Then it becomes a part of L2. Mod chi square is equal to alpha square integral a to b phi square dx. Now this is finite and alpha is finite. So this should be finite. So this also is a part of L2 space, and we have showed that this condition is satisfied. Now we need to show that the second property, that is the two elements phi and psi are an element of vector space L2. Then we should be able to show that the sum of them is also a member of L2 space. So let us say that phi is member of L2 space. That means this integral should be finite. Same way, psi is also member of L2 space. That means this integral should be finite. Now we add these two functions, that is psi plus psi into phi plus psi dx. This integral should be finite. We simply expand this. We have two terms here. First one is phi square. This is finite because we know that is a condition we started with. The second is also finite because that is also the condition is which we started with. The third, we have another thing which is a product of two functions which is integrated a to b dx. So this should be finite as well because of the properties of these two. So this has a very fancy name in the vector space. You might have come across something called the Schwarz inequality, and that is also we can use it for the function. The first two are trivially, this also should be finite. So this leads to the proof that the L2 space is in fact is a vector space or set of all functions which are square integrable in an interval forms a vector space. So this is another abstraction where we have functions as a vector space. So this is an interesting concept which we are going to develop. Let me stop here and continue in the next lecture.